So the last time we met, we had just started the final chapter of the 7 chapters of the single intention of the Gongchik. So this last chapter, the vital points, the key points related to the fruition, the final fruition, which is the result of Buddhahood. And so the statements in here, 15 statements, they help clarify some of the issues, right, related to how should we understand what is this result called Buddhahood, what is this result called enlightenment, complete and perfect enlightenment. If you look at the sources, and especially in the earlier sources, they often speak of 3 bodhis, 3 types of bodhis, meaning 3 types of awakenings, 3 types of enlightenment. And what are these 3 types of bodhis or 3 types of enlightenment? It is the enlightenment of a hearer Buddha. What is a hearer Buddha? Commonly we call them arhats. Then there is the bodhi or the enlightenment of solitary Buddhas, partaker Buddhas. Then there is the bodhi on the enlightenment of complete and perfect Buddhas, Samya Sambuddha. So Buddha Shakyamuni, Samya Sambuddha, complete and perfect Buddha. So this fruition here pertains to the bodhi, the enlightenment, the final fruition of complete and perfect Buddhas. As I mentioned before, in a way, maybe, like this chapter, is in a way furthest from our reality of all the chapters, of all the contents of the chapters. And I think in part is also reflected in how short the commentaries are for the Vajra statements that are included within this chapter, the chapter of fruition. So, I think it's helpful for us as we look at the Vajra statements in this chapter to understand that in the end, right, words and ideas and concepts cannot really adequately, don't have the power to really show us what this final fruition is. So in a way, I guess you could say that when we look at the Vajra statements here and the commentary related to the Vajra statements here, perhaps try to look at it this way. To look at it as helping us understand what this final fruition is not, rather than what it is, what it is not. So at least, then we can clear any active or hidden misconceptions that we may have with regards to this final result, this final fruit, this final attainment of complete and perfect Buddhas. So that, I think, is the overall point that we have to remember as we go through these 15 statements. So statement, the very first statement, just to read that again, it says, at the stage of Buddhahood, the 2 truths are completely indivisible. So in other words, right, briefly, that the Buddha taught about the 2 truths is because the Buddha was trying to show us, to guide those of us who are not yet Buddhas, guide us through the stages of the path, help us in our evolving into the state of complete and perfect Buddhas. In the effort to help us achieve Buddhahood, Buddha had to speak in terms of 2 truths, relative truth and ultimate truth. But when we arrive at the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood, know that the two truths are no longer two truths, but they are a single and indivisible reality, which is at the state of Buddhism. There's no longer a division into all cause and effect is like this, all emptiness is like this. And so more importantly, it pertains to the relationship between emptiness and cause and effect. Right? Emptiness is the object to be realized when it comes to the ultimate truth of things. Cause and effect is the proper object to be realized if we want to understand relative truth in an unmistaken way. At the level of Buddha, no longer there is any difference, much less contradiction between cause and effect working and the empty nature of things. So that's how we can understand the first Vajra statement. So what we can do also with these Vajra statements that pertains to the fruit, to the result, it's not so much thinking that, again, these statements will, let us understand, what complete perfect Buddhahood is. But how statements that talk about the fruition can help us while we are still on the path. So we can also relate to these 15 statements in this way. One way, as I suggested, is they can help us understand or clarify misconceptions that we have regarding what the fruition is. Even if it cannot show us directly what the fruition is, it can show us the kinds of mistakes and wrong views we have regarding to the fruit. So one way. Second way is it can also then inform us on, based on this, it can then inform us how we can understand matters of the path in a better way, in a more skillful way, in a clearer way, so that we can reach the end of the path, achieve the fruition faster. Yeah. Second statement, a Buddha's knowing wisdom is non-dual and free from extremes. A Buddha's knowing wisdom, a Buddha's wisdom of knowing, of seeing clearly, is non-dual and free from extremes. So often we see this, a Vajra statement will be made and then followed by a few Vajra statements that are basically based on the same theme, based on the same understanding, and being elaborated. So here, what is being elaborated is when it comes to the specific issue of what is Buddha wisdom for Buddhas. Often we say, Buddhas have wisdom. Buddhahood is defined as wisdom and compassion fully, right? Fully accomplished. So then, with regards to that wisdom, what is it? What can we know? Here it says, Buddha's knowing wisdom is non-dual and free from the extremes of existing or not existing. This statement is made in response to those who say, regarding this knowing wisdom of Buddhas, there are only two views. This is what other people say. There are only two views. To hold that it exists and to hold that it does not exist. Meaning there were debates circulating around during Kyobpa's time. Some who says, actually, so-called Buddha wisdom at the state of Buddha actually don't exist. And you and I might think, well, that's kind of strange. Why do they say that? It's because they say, what is the purpose of wisdom? The purpose of wisdom is to serve as an antidote for the opposite of wisdom, right? Confusion, ignorance. And if Buddhas have already destroyed all confusion and ignorance, then wisdom have no purpose. Because there are analogies to that, Again, it might sound strange to you, but there are examples found in the sutras and in the tantras where it says, oh, like wisdom is like ice. And the kleshas is like fire. When you throw a big block of ice into the fire consumes the ice consumes the fire, all finished, all done. It's based on these kinds of analogies. Also based on, for example, I'm sure you have heard, like, oh, the Dharma is just like a raft that you take to get to the other shore. Once you arrive at the other shore, no more raft. Don't need the raft anymore. So such expressions, such statements, cause some people to insist. So maybe here is the key point, to insist that no, wisdom don't exist at the state of Buddhahood. Then, opposing that view are those who say, no. So many places in the sutras, in the tantras, in the commentaries, it says, Buddhas have the 10 powers. What are the 10 powers but aspects of his wisdom, of their wisdom? How can you say, right, Buddhas don't have wisdom? Then we say, oh, the infinite Buddha qualities, those arise from this wisdom. Then they can quote, many places. Oh, yes, Buddha wisdom is like this, Buddha wisdom is like this, there's the 5 wisdoms, all of that, right? And I think we are more familiar with that. But even that, Kyobpa says, careful. Be careful. Because if you go in that direction too much, you are also going to fall into wrong view. Now you insist, Buddhas have wisdom. Without wisdom, what are Buddhas good for? So Kyobpa's statement is to insist that it exists and to insist that it doesn't exist are the two extremes. In other words, you could say, better to understand it in this way. It exists in some way, it does not exist in other ways. This is maybe, as we say, you can have your truths and eat it too. Have your cake and eat it too. It exists in a certain way, of course. It doesn't exist in other ways. And in that way, understand that Buddha wisdom is non-dual and free from the extremes. Okay, now let's look at Khenpo Kunpal's commentary. If one divides such a knowing wisdom of a Buddha into different aspects, then it comprises the wisdom that knows the ultimate nature, that is, the wisdom that knows the nature of phenomena just as it is, the ultimate nature of all phenomena. So this is emptiness. The wisdom that realizes the emptiness nature of all things. 2, the wisdom that sees the total extent of phenomena, that knows all phenomena of profound dependent origination of cause and effect and so forth, without exception, distinctly, without mixing them, meaning without confusing all the details of cause and effect. Just like one can see all the inner structures of a fresh amalaki fruit placed in the palm of one's hand. This is seeing relative clearly. So Khenpo Kunpal says, of course there is Buddha wisdom. The one side, the wisdom that realizes emptiness, but that realizing of emptiness does not destroy the ability to see cause and effect clearly. So however, this wisdom is non-dual in terms of fabricated phenomena. Thus, it is free from extremes and is in a state of sameness, equality. It is said in the great net of magical manifestation, quoting the Maya Jala Tantra. The omniscient wisdom, the all-knowing wisdom, the supreme knower of all is beyond the nature of consciousness. This wisdom holds a non-dual nature. It has no thoughts but exists naturally, exists spontaneously, exists naturally. So principally, so Khenpo Kunpal's commentary is very short, brief, and he doesn't go into, doesn't allude to the debates that were going on in Kyobpa's time with regards to this issue. The larger commentary does go into some of that, even that, not much. It does go into one of that. So when you look at the larger commentary, you will see that generally the commentary is concerned or interprets this statement in such a way that shows that they are more concerned with the position that wisdom don't exist at the state of Buddha. Yeah? Even though they start off, like Dharmakirti start off by saying, how we understand this statement is you cannot say wisdom, you cannot fixate on the idea that wisdom exists at the state of Buddhahood or wisdom don't exist. Yeah, it starts off by saying that. But when you read the commentary, you'll see that of the two extremes of exist and not exist, or essentialism or eternalism and nihilism, they are much more concerned with a nihilistic understanding, meaning the position that wisdom don't exist at the state of Buddha. They're more concerned about that. And so that again, tells us about something. Tells us, or our take-home lesson is that if you, again, I think most of you, especially if you're only reading, which is in a way good, if you're only reading like popular Western Dharma teachers, then you usually won't have this problem of nihilism. It's all very positive, Buddhahood is this, it's all, very nice, very warm, very fuzzy, okay? But if you read the original text, you're more likely to have a nihilistic view. Because, there's such a strong tradition within Buddhism that uses the language of negation. Not this, not this, not that, not this, not that. Like Heart Sutra, for example. No, 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 no. no form, no feeling, no perception, right? No mental formation, no consciousness. The Buddha says there are the five aggregates, right? Elsewhere, the Buddha clearly taught there are the five aggregates. But the Heart Sutra says no to all five. The Buddha says, there are the six consciousnesses. Consciousness related to sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thinking. Heart Sutra says, no sights, no sounds, no smell, no taste, no touch, no thoughts. No seeing consciousness, no smelling consciousness, no. Up to and including no suffering, no cause, no end, and no path to the end. Up to and including no to all the 12 links of dependent origination. So if you actually read, those sutras and the Perfection of Wisdom sutras especially, it sounds like it's always saying no. So that is why, in Chodra, in the older commentaries, they use this Vajra statement mostly to dispel wrong views, misconception that are leaning in the direction of nihilism. And not so concerned about correcting the problems that come from leaning in the direction of essentialism or eternalism. But of course, they all start by saying both extremes are errors. And so then the basic statement says, the Buddha wisdom is basically a non-dual knowing, a non-dual wisdom knowing. So immediately, for example, Chodra's commentary, he says, this kind of Buddha wisdom is free of the faults of 5 types of nihilistic understandings of this wisdom. And so immediately he goes into listing that there are 5 nihilistic views pertaining to this wisdom. So the nihilistic view that can arise from misunderstanding Madhyamaka's presentation. For those of you who know these terms. Then the misunderstanding that arises from the so-called Hinayana view of emptiness, which is just breaking things down. Then the nihilistic view of basically secular materialists. Well, when you die, that's it, nothing else. When things break, that's it, no more. End of story. Move on. All you zombies, keep moving on until you're dead. That's our secular. From the Buddhist perspective, this is the secular materialist view. Move on. Let the dead bury the dead. I'm misquoting the Bible now. Let the dead bury the dead. Move on. But move on as what? Zombies until you die. Then other people can continue moving on. That nihilism. And the nihilism of ordinary mentally fabricated emptiness, it says. This is just not even pertaining to existential questions, but just, there's nothing. And then the 5th one is a nihilism related to misunderstanding the Dzogchen's presentation of emptiness. Because certain expressions in Dzogchen can lead some people into misunderstanding that this is speaking of like emptiness as some kind of reality. And even in, I would say, like tantric sadhanas, if you don't understand the language, it can also lead to that. Because of statements like very commonly translated as from within emptiness arises blah blah blah. But if you make the mistake of thinking that this emptiness is some kind of like, source of all things, that everything manifests from there. In fact, poetically, Buddhists have used those expressions, but it doesn't mean literally that. In the oldest commentary, Dorje Lopön, he says, fundamentally, emptiness is about cause and effect. That you cannot leave the understanding of cause and effect in your endeavors, in your attempts to understand emptiness. So actually, famously, right, various Indian great masters, Tibetan masters, they have said, like, those who think things ultimately exist, they are no better than cows. Okay, this is an insult to cows, okay? Basically, it's saying, stupid. Those who think things ultimately exist, things exist in an ultimate way, then they're, no better than cows. Then those who think, things ultimately don't exist at all, meaning that things don't exist at all in whatsoever way. They are more stupid than cows. The first one, no better than cows. The second, the nihilist view, then they are more stupid than cows, more dangerous. So now, zooming out, statement 2 is really about warning us, reminding us. When we think in terms of the state of Buddhahood as a state that transcends all knowable things, as a state that is so beyond, right, where you and I are now, don't, however, make the mistake of somehow then thinking in the state of Buddhahood, cause and effect has disappeared. This is the fundamental point. This is like the take-home lesson. Don't make the mistake of thinking now cause and effect don't apply anymore. So take cause and effect seriously, skillfully, carefully. But in case, now, to speak from the other side, in case you then get paralyzed by the reality of cause and effect, which I think, it's not an abstract, outside the realm of philosophizing, outside the realm of, thinking deeply, thinking in a fancy way. I think some of us feel that the weight of cause and effect is just too heavy, right? So it is very possible, that we in whatever situation that we find ourselves in now, a situation that makes us unhappy, uncomfortable, unsatisfied. And then you say, well, I see the cause and effect, right? But then instead of seeing cause and effect and then knowing, right, what to do with it, that seeing becomes a heavy burden. We're paralyzed by it. That is also when it's really now then important to address the other side. That this is not essentialism. Also, it does not ultimately exist. Meaning, cause and effect is also very fragile. To say that things operate, things exist, things happen, things manifest, things turn up, and things go away based on this principle of karmic causality is not to say that things are ever fixed. The principle is fixed. The principle is fixed. But what is this principle? This principle is everything arises interdependently, manifesting like magic, coming and going all the time. So using secret mantra, perhaps, vocabulary, we say they are a display. They are a magical display. Magical also means illusory. In less poetic terms, nothing is as fixed and solid as we mentally solidify and fixate on things. That principle of cause and effect also means that if we go about trying to change the cause and effect that is dynamically unfolding still, then we can make a difference. Then we can make a difference. In other words, making a difference is always possible. It may not be possible in the stubborn way that you want it to be possible. But it is possible because it's dynamic. It's magical. So 7.2. This wisdom of Buddhas, it is non-dual and free from these extremes of is and is not, exist and don't exist. So in a way, this Vajra statement isn't talking about Buddhas and their wisdom. It's talking about our fixating on yes, exist, no, don't exist. Right? Nothing can be done. I can do it and make it happen exactly how I want it. Both those two, faults of those two are revealed. We are reminded of that. Like the feeling of, sometimes it's just like, say for example, feeling of like, I'm alone. Yes, of course, kind of not comfortable. But it's also not true. Where do you want to lean? Which Which side do you want to lean on? If we feed the mental habit on leaning on only seeing that I'm alone, then there's no end to that story. But if you want to lean on the other side and say, actually, I am, but I'm not, there's also no end to that story. Choices that we make. And more importantly, can we see that we can make those choices? I can say, that I have experienced this, which is, once I'm able to see that there are choices that I can make, then the whole situation becomes less oppressive. I don't yet have the power and ability to always make the right choice. I can tell you that. But really knowing and trusting. Trusting means like after knowing, I can just rest now, That's what I mean by trusting. And not like knowing and trusting, you're like, well, that's not really knowing. You still have to trust, like you have to like pretend or believe. No, what I mean is when you know, and then you can know enough that you now don't have to fight. You can just rest there. And know what? Know that I can make choices. I can choose to lean on this side or lean on this side. Then so much of the extra layers of confusion and suffering you have already left behind. Then even when you're making the wrong choice, you can more easily accept. Yeah? You can more easily accept. Because if you cannot accept, which is our defense strategy, when we have made the wrong choice, and somehow if people point out or ourselves see it, because we don't, want to see this clearly, then we live in denial. And we live in blame. And we live in regret. But we want to shove all of it away. Then it can never get out of this mess, Okay. Sorry, after not meeting for a while, I guess I have to now it's already late. So let's do our dedication and we will continue tomorrow. So Jigten Sumgon's dedication prayer. Sublime, precious, venerable, and glorious root and lineage gurus, assembly of Idam deities, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas dwelling in the 10 directions, and all assemblies of Viras, Viranis, Yoginis, and Dakinis, please heed me. May the virtues collected in the 3 times by me and the entirety of samsara and nirvana, and the inherent root of virtue not result in the 8 worldly dharmas, the 4 causes of samsara, and the resultant states of hearers and solitary realizers, and may all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, particularly those enemies who hate us, obstruct us who harm those who create obstacles, maras who mislead, and their mara retinues, have happiness, be separated from suffering, and quickly attain the unsurpassed, perfect, and precious Bodhi. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may we benefit sentient beings with body, speech, and mind. May the afflictive thoughts of attachment, aversion, Ignorance, pride, and jealousy not arise in my mind stream. May thoughts of name, fame, gain, respect, and so forth in this life not arise for even a moment. With my mind stream moistened by love, compassion, and bodhicitta, may I come under the care of virtuous spiritual friends, and having become as limitless as space, may I achieve the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life by the virtues collected in the 3 times by me, and the entirety of samsara and nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain the unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious Bodhi. Okay, hasta mañana.